بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم والحمد لله رب العالمين اللهم صل وسلم وبارك على نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين وبعد. So today is the last session of this academic Sira course, and I will put at the end of it what the evaluation will look like, inshallah ta'ala. It'll be a reflective piece, so it should be something that you are capable, inshallah, of doing easily. Intention of making, inshallah, the course an easier one to write. I'm just gonna share my, yes, give me a second here. Okay, perfect. Okay, we're good. Right. So session 8, and I said this is probably going to be an 8 session course. Usually my courses go between 10 and 14. But this the course that the semester that has Ramadan in it is always a bit of a shorter semester, so it's going to be an 8 session course, and I compressed all of what I wanted to talk about within these 8 sessions, so you should be all right. So what's left of the course is just talking a little bit about the Prophet ﷺ's grandfather, Abdul Muttalib ibn Hashim, talking about his father, Abdullah ibn Abdul Muttalib ibn Hashim, and about his mother, Amina bint Wahab. And kind of talking about the right prior to his birth, his blessed birth. And then we'll talk about his birth specifically at the beginning of the next in the beginning of part 2. Part 2 won't be next semester. It'll be probably the semester after. Next semester, I may not be giving a course, or if I do, I'll give something that I'll just repeat the Aqidah. Aqidah I usually do every year in May, so I may just do that again. This second part will be probably the semester after, when I have a little bit more time on my hands to run it. But anyone who writes the exam or attends it will get an email once we run part 2. So if you want to, and if you're not registered at all, you can speak to Sister Neda. They can add you to the list, and then we can email you once we run part 2 if this is something you want to continue to attend, or if you're interested in it. So let's talk about Abdul Muttalib ibn Hashim. So his name was Shayba, and his mother was Salma bint Amr from Bani Najjar from Khazraj. And I pointed this out to you a couple of sessions ago. Know this piece because it matters. Abdul Muttalib's mother was from Yathrib. This is the Prophet ﷺ's connection. So he wasn't sent ﷺ to a city where he knew he had nothing at all. He was sent to a city where he had somewhat of a connection. His grandfather's mother was from Bani Najjar. Hashim ibn Abd Manaf, which is Abdul Muttalib's dad, married Salma, and Salma was a lady. I told you a little bit about her a couple of sessions ago. That Salma was a lady who was of extremely high status. She chose her husbands. Her husband, she didn't get courted, she courted. And she chose Hashim, and Hashim obviously accepted. Men were able to marry many women back in the day, so for them, it didn't they didn't have a problem with accepting marriage. Today is different. The difficulty that we have in marriage today comes from this is one of the problems, is that men only marry one lady, so they become much more picky. It becomes more difficult. Back then they married more, so it was easier. But marriage happened quicker, and people didn't. So Salma, she chose Hashim. And they only had Abdul Muttalib. The most narrations that they only had Abdul Muttalib because he died. Hashim ibn Abd Manaf died young. And her son Shayba grew up taken care of by his uncle Al-Muttalib. So Hashim has one of his siblings is called Al-Muttalib. And if you go back to the earlier diagram that I put for you in the slides, or the later diagram that we're going to look at today, you'll see what I mean. And because he would go and with his uncle often for the different journeys, the business journeys to Sham and to Yemen, he was always with his uncle, serving his uncle, getting him what he needed. People sometimes would think he was his uncle's slave, right? So they would say, "Hada Abdul Muttalib, he's just Muttalib's slave." He wasn't. He was his nephew, and he was learning from him. But because Abdul Muttalib had that similar etiquette the Prophet ﷺ ended up having and taught us, which is that humbleness, where he was in service, he was always served people who was older than him. When the people saw him, they always assumed that was Abdul Muttalib's slave. So they would say, that's Abdul Muttalib, the slave of Muttalib. And it became a nickname, and became his name. And it became actually more famous than his name. People don't know his name is Shayba. People know him as Abdul Muttalib, and that's what his name is in the Chronicles. He has a number of accomplishments. He did a couple of important things that I think is worth sharing with you, so you understand the Prophet ﷺ's advantage in Mecca. And I know this advantage because, funny enough, I moved around a lot when I was a kid. I was born here, then I grew up in Saudi. But we went back to Syria, and my father wasn't always there for a while. We lived in the village. What I did find out leading this masjid that I was in was the older masjid of the village, was all the elderly people who helped build it. They were all in their 80s at the time, and none of them knew who my dad was nor cared, but they knew who my grandfather was. And the reason that I got, I was offered the time that they offered me and the ease to run a masjid. Yeah, 17. What did I know? I knew nothing. So everything I did was wrong. But the reason that I was allowed that space to read, I don't think I ever heard a negative word from any of these men. Like maybe 13, 14 guys, all of them over 80. SubhanAllah, I was the imam of this masjid for 12 years. I buried them all before I came. All of them passed away. Rahmatullah alayhim jami'an. I never knew my grandfather. My grandfather died when he was 39. My dad was maybe 11 or 12 years old when he so he doesn't even know his father very well. But these men knew my grandfather. And the funny thing is that my grandfather died in 1968. I'm talking to you about something that started in 2004 or 2003. Like the first time I started in this was 2003. That was the year that I began there. So when you think about it, you're talking somewhere around 45 years or more that this man had died. Yet all they did was just talk about stories. And he did this and he did that and did this. And it taught me something. It taught me a lot of things. It taught me many things about the legacy a person can leave in the hearts of people around them if they're a little bit generous and a little bit selfless and a little bit empathetic. It also showed me that I understand this part of the Prophet ﷺ like very well. I understand exactly what this means. He grew up as the grandson of Abdul Muttalib because his father passed away young, as I'm going to explain to you. So he was known in Mecca as the descendant of Abdul Muttalib, and that served him. That served him many ways, alayhi salatu wasalam. It was to a certain degree a social protection for him, alayhi salatu wasalam. They revered Abdul Muttalib so much that they didn't dare go after him, alayhi salatu wasalam. Like it took a long time for them to build a backbone to go after him physically, alayhi salatu wasalam, to actually want to think of killing him took them at least 7-8 years of his da'wah, alayhi salatu wasalam. And the reason is the aura of Abdul Muttalib was there in his life. So what did he do? So one of the first things he did is he retrieved Zamzam. So this is a big deal. When the wars that happened historically over the stewardship of Mecca between Khuza'a and Jurhum and Quraysh and Thaqif and Hawazin and these tribes that kept on fighting over the stewardship of Mecca, finally Qusay ibn Kilab being able to kick everyone out and hold on to Mecca for the longest time till this day, obviously. Or maybe not, but that's a discussion for another political course, not this one. What happened during all of this is that once, we don't know exactly who, one of the tribes, as they were being kicked out of Mecca, they were retreating out of Mecca, they did a really dirty move. They covered up Zamzam. They ruined the well, right? And they covered everything up. And when the people came in, they couldn't find it. They could not find the well. And this tribe, they say it was Khuza'a, but we don't know. It was them or Jurhum. But one of the tribes on their way out of Mecca, they knew they were losing, so they had a couple of days. So they really did a good job. They completely, they turned the whole area, a radius of maybe 1.5 kilometers, into ruins, so that you had no idea. And then no one could find it, and then that, of course, the people who came in couldn't find it, and then it just became a problem, and it went a couple of hundred years without finding it, and then and because there was no water, the interest in fighting over Mecca came down. So the importance of Mecca wasn't just the fact that there was a Kaaba in it and that was the religious center, but also because it had Zamzam. And Zamzam was a reliable source of water but they couldn't find it anymore. So actually it kind of worked both ways. They ruined Zamzam, so that was a problem. But the wars for Mecca stopped for a while. People stopped. Whoever was stuck, Quraysh was stuck with Mecca without Zamzam. No one really cared to fight too much over it because there was no water, until obviously the time of Abdul Muttalib ibn Hashim. Abdul Muttalib would grow up as the son of his father, Hashim ibn Abd Manaf, one of the muwahhideen of Arabia, and the person who started the Ilaf, right? And the person who started the Ishtiaq was Sayyid. I talked to you about Hashim ibn Abd Manaf a couple of sessions ago. He did a lot of things. So he lived off the status of his own father, and then he built his own status, right? He built his own name. He made a name for himself in Mecca. So he was revered and he was respected. And I put for you a couple of stories. I'll talk about I'm talking about retrieving Zamzam first, and I'll talk to you about the story of of the elephant. The elephant everyone knows. You've ever heard it before, but I'm not sure if you've heard the story of retrieving Zamzam. And you'll find this obviously in the story in the Sirah of Ibn Ishaq if you're interested in reading it. So Abdul Muttalib didn't retrieve Zamzam by mistake. Abdul Muttalib became obsessed by Zamzam. He thought about it all the time. And he took his son Al-Harith ibn Abdul Muttalib, the eldest, and they would go out for hours a day, just digging in different spaces, looking for Zamzam, hoping that they would find it. Because in his mind, like, we won't get back to where we were. We won't, Mecca will not find its position in Arabia as the center without this source of water. So he became obsessed by this idea. And then one day, and this story is told to us by Sayyidina Ali ibn Abi Talib, ibn Abdul Muttalib. So Sayyidina Ali is telling us what his father told him and what he heard from, learning from his father. So Abdul Muttalib one night was sleeping, and he saw in a dream, someone came and told him, "Ihfir Taybah, dig Taybah." فقلت وما طيبة? And what is طيبة? And the person left. That was the first night. So he didn't know what that meant. He slept. The next night he's sleeping, and so someone comes into his dream and said, "Ihfir barra." And the word طيبة obviously is something that is beautified, and barra is something that is has bir, and it offers only the virtues. فقلت وما برة فذهب عني. He said, what is barra? And then the person leaves. The next night he's sleeping. قال فجاء فقلت قال احفر المضمونة. dig the one that is hidden, the gem that is hidden away. فقلت وما المضمونة? And the person left. And then the fourth night he would sleep, and then the person would come to him and say, احفر زمزم. Dig Zamzam. فقلت وما زمزم? They didn't know its name was Zamzam. It was just a bi'r. The name of it was retrieved by Abdul Muttalib, and of course consolidated by the Prophet والسلام, through the story of Hajar السلام, with Ismail. But up to then, it was just the well of Mecca. It was just the well. Zamzam, the name had lost its existence throughout the years. فقلت ما زمزم؟ قال لا تنزف أبدا ولا تذم تسقي الحجيج الأعظم وهي بين الفرث والدم عند نقرة الغراب الأعصم عند قرية النمل. So he was given a description. He's given a description. This will it's a well that will never ever stop giving water, and it will never bring shame. It'll always bring goodness, and it will be the reason, or it will be the source of the siqaya, meaning the nourishment of water, the quenching the thirst of the hajij. When the large number of hajij came. So this is what Abdul Muttalib saw in his dream. Up till then, the number of hajij or hujjaj that came for the hajj was low, because it was a pagan system, so it was low. The largest number of hujjaj that Arabia had ever seen was the hajj of the Prophet ﷺ. That was when. So he's saying that this is going to be tasqi al-hajij al-a'zam, the large gathering of hujjaj. He had no idea what that meant at the time, but obviously we do. وَهِيَ بَيْنَ الْفَرْثِ وَالدَّمِ. And you will see it, you will find it between blood and intestines, right? عند نقرة الغراب الأعصم, where the black crow with the white head pecks the ground. عند قرية النمل, where you'll find an anthill. So of course, Abdul Muttalib memorized this. He wakes up in the morning, he takes Harith with him, Ibn Abdul Muttalib, and they go and they start looking for it. And it takes him days until he finds someone within an area slaughtering the story goes that he's sitting there tired after days of looking for this, and he's not finding any of it. And he sees a man who brings a jamal, and he slaughters the jamal, and then the blood goes, and then the jamal, when they take care of the slaughtered animal, then the intestines are out, and then he sees a crow, and then he goes up and he sees exactly what he sees the anthill. So he kicks the guy out and take your jamal, get out of here. And he brings the Harith, and they start digging it, and he digs it, and the water gushes out. And all of Quraysh comes in celebration. Bi'ru abina Ismail. It's the well of our father Ismail. And they told him, وَإِنَّ لَنَا فِيهَا حَقًّا فَأَشْرِكْنَا مَعَكَ فِيهَا. We all have a haqq in this because we're all from Quraysh. We're all descendants of Ismail. So make us your partners. فَقَالِ عَبْدُ الْمُطَّلِبْ مَا أَنَا بِفَاعِلٍ. No, this is not yours. I don't. You're not my sharik in this. إن هذا الأمر قد خصصت به دونكم. This is something that I have been chosen to do. Like he was obsessed by this, and he sees this vision at night, and then he gets it. So he's like, I've been chosen to do this. وأعطيته من بينكم. This has been offered to me amongst all of you. This is something. So they get upset and they fight. So they decided to go to Kahina ibn Sa'd ibn Hudhaym. So there was a Kahina, there was a lady who was a sorcerer, and she was a qadi, one of the hukam. She would offer judgments. So they went, they said, we'll go to her and she will judge whether this happens or not. On the way there, the story goes, is that they lose their way. They don't find their way to where they're going. And they get so lost for so long that all of their food and nourishment is all gone to the point where they're going to die. So they start digging. This is what the Arabs used to do. They would dig holes and take sticks, and you would lie down beside your hole with a stick, and he would, and when you fell in, right, you push the other guy who would do the same, so that everyone would fall in together and die together. So no one would stay on top of the surface and then be eaten by hyenas and kind of dismembered. They had that superstition that a lot of the Greeks and the Romans had. So they did that. They started digging their graves and preparing to die. So Al-Muttalib said, "Inna hada al-ajz." This is helplessness, and I don't like this. We go and we try our best. So he gets up, Al-Muttalib, he gets on his camel, and the camel stands up. When the camel stands up, water gushes from under its foot, and they all go and drink water. And the people who are with him, Al-Walid ibn Mughira, and the people who are had gone to get there because they wanted they wanted to be partners in this. فقالوا قد خصصت به دوننا. This is a sign for us. We don't need to go anymore. We came back. So they came back, and the well stayed in the control of Abdul Muttalib for the entirety of his life. He made it public for everyone, but he did. So the Arab is not about what was going. He didn't keep the water for himself and sell it. No. He just wanted the sharaf, the pride of it being his choice. You understand the difference? This is the difference. You like, this is stupid. No, this is the difference. He's not going to keep it, and he's not going to charge money for it. It's just he's the one who's going to say that this is mine, and I'm going to offer it to everyone, instead of it being that he has to do it. A big deal for him, and big deal for the Arab. And it actually is a big deal, and it still is today. And if you understand what I just said, you understand how maybe 90% of politics in the world works. It's all about what words were used and how they were used. And people who do political analysis, they look for these little details. And this is actually what makes deals and breaks deals, is just these little choices of what was insinuated when a certain word was said. Because people get very upset if their leaders show any form of weakness or sellout. So Al-Muttalib, he just wanted that piece, that this is I get to choose. And then he chose Al-Muttalib to offer it to all of Quraysh and all of the Hajjaj, and it was open for everyone, but it was something that he got to choose to do. So he retrieved Zamzam, and of course, retrieving Zamzam, brought a lot of wealth to Mecca, because now Mecca was a place not only that would go for religious reasons, but you're also going to go for you can stay there for as long as you want. You don't need to take with you your zed, because there's water, and that water is enough for everyone who was there. And this is how cities were built and empires were built, just having that source of fresh water. And of course, Abdul Muttalib became extremely famous because of this. His name, he was a household name. And now we go for Hajj, we don't have to take all of our water with us, because there's Zamzam there. And Abdul Muttalib found it, he retrieved it, and he offered it for free for all the Hajjaj. So Abdul Muttalib was a household name all throughout Arabia. People loved, and he was someone who could have run for president back then and won. So that's the first thing that he did, was Zamzam. Number two was confronting Abraha. And we all know this story, and I put it for you in slides in English and Arabic if you want to read about it. Abraha, Al-Ashram, as he is known, he in Abyssinia or in Habasha. Habasha is the only country in the history of the world that has never been colonialized or occupied. Habasha is the only country that no one has ever occupied that piece of land till this day. So Habasha has always had very strong kings and very strong kingdoms. And you can talk to people who come from that part of the world, and they have a very high degree of pride in that. And he was an ally of the Romans. And if you remember, I told you that in Yemen, the king of Himyar was always an ally of the Persians. So these wars between the kingdom of Aksum or Abyssinia or Habasha and the kingdom of Himyar, where the Arabs were allied with the Persians, would happen across history many times. And Abraha was one of the last leaders of Habasha to cross the Red Sea and go and fight the king of Himyar and beat him and send him back into modern day Oman, far away from Yemen. And when he did that, he wanted to capitalize on this new piece of land that he had taken, and he wanted to solidify Yemen as a colony of Habasha, allied to the Romans, so that the Persians don't control that body of water, which is till this day, the Red Sea, and is still an important part. You can't go around Africa to get to places. You have to go through the Red Sea, and if you want to get to Europe, this is the only way. So controlling that little piece there between Qarn Afriqa and Yemen is actually till is extremely strategic and very important. And we gave it up, unfortunately, as Muslims, because we don't understand the importance of things. But this piece was very important. So he wanted to solidify his strength in Yemen. So he built a very large kanisa. He called it Qullais. He built this large church. And his goal was to make it the center attraction within Arabia. Like, he wanted to make this the place where people would come and they would trade, and this would bring a lot of wealth and provision for people in the region. But he built this amazing church, and he prepared everything, but it wasn't picking up. Like, it wasn't happening. Like, years would go by, and they weren't. This investment was not working. So he would send people to figure out, okay, why are the Arab not coming here? Because the Arab were happy with Mecca. For them, it's a religious symbol that they respect and they love, and there's water there, so they didn't want to. So no matter how much he tried, he couldn't seem to to change the Arabs' minds. And then he actually did a lot of marketing. He did so much marketing that the story is, you can find. I'm not sure I put it here or not, but yeah. So a man of the tribe of Kinana. Put it there for you. They got upset from Abraha's ongoing marketing of this new church and this planning in Sana'a, that he would go and he would take a dump right in the middle of his kanisa, like right in the middle of the of the church, and leave. And I don't think that's what. Abraha had a plan, but that was when he said, oh, "That's it. These people need to be." So he took his army. So his army didn't cross the Red Sea for this. His army was already in Sana'a today. Like, his army had been there for a while. He had already occupied that piece of land. He was building a city there, and he would go to wreck or to destroy the Kaaba after being there for years and not achieving what he was going to achieve. Like, the only way for me to fix this is if I go and I ruin this religious place that they think is important. Once I destroy it, khalas, they'll stop believing in it, and they'll come to me. They'll come to my kanisa. It'll be fine. This was his very, very, very simple logic. He's like, well, a bunch of pagans. This is nothing. This is a little house in the middle of the desert with them. I'll just go and demolish it, and then they'll convert to Christianity, and they'll come over to. So he takes his army, and he was a showman. He had some showmanship in him. So he didn't need to go with the army he went with. He could have went with a much smaller army, but he went with people over 60,000 people. Like, at the time, 10 would have sufficed to take out whatever army Quraysh and the others had. And he took with him, he had elephants that he had brought over the sea that were living there. And Arabs had not really most Arabs had not seen elephants before, so it was a sight. So the Arabs would come and camp on the sides, just to watch Abraha marching over with his elephants, and just to see it, but they wouldn't. There's no point. You can't do anything. So he comes closer to Mecca, and he camps outside. And as there was some blood. I mean, some of the tribes ganged up and tried to fight him off, but they couldn't do much. The army was way too big. So when he was outside the outskirts of Mecca, the elephant that he had stopped moving. Like, it wouldn't budge anymore. And some narrations call his name was Mahmud. And they kept on pushing the elephant wouldn't move. So he actually camped there for a little bit. And because he didn't want it to come off as there's a problem, like that the leading tank that he has in his army does not want to listen anymore. So he camped on the outskirts of Mecca with the intention of maybe talking to them, the chieftain of Mecca. At the time, it was Abdul Muttalib ibn Hashim, undisputed leader of the city. So he would call him in. The narration you find Ibn Hisham goes into some detail that. Just for the sake, it's a story. So Al-Muttalib would walk in, dressed fully in black with a large black imamah that goes down. The Prophet ﷺ would have a little piece of the imamah that went down in his life because his grandfather did. He would walk in, and Al-Muttalib was a large man, and he carried his cane with him. So he walked in, فَهَابَهُ أَبْرَهَا. And Abraha revered this person who walked in. قال فنزل من عرشه. He was sitting on a he had his tent set up and the line, and then they would put they would stack material, and he would put his throne on top, so he would be sitting above everyone who's sitting under. That's how kings did. So when Abdul Muttalib came in from the tent, هابه أبرهة, so he came down and he sat down on the where the guests would sit face to face, and he would talk to him. And Abraha was waiting for Abdul Muttalib to start negotiating something. Like he wanted a deal. Abraha was a businessman. He didn't care for it. His goal really wasn't to destroy the Kaaba, at least not fully when he went there. He just wanted a deal. He just wanted, can you share the attention a bit? Can you have the people come here, do Hajj here, send them down to I have a great, it's beautiful, it's new, it's absolutely gorgeous, and there's a lot there, and it'll work for everyone. It was a great economic, and he wanted someone to negotiate with. He didn't want to actually fight. He didn't see the benefit. He didn't want to anger the Arabs more. He wanted to win them over so that he would solidify his kingdom. So he's waiting for Abdul Muttalib to negotiate with him. So Abdul Muttalib, he says, the only thing Abdul Muttalib comes back with is that he asks Abraha, are the people in that area, are they your soldiers? He says, yes, they're mine. He said, well, they took 15 camels that are marked in this specific way. So Abraha's like, okay, so what's the problem? So those are my camels. I need you to give them back. So Abraha says, أتيت لهدم البيت. I'm here to قد هبتك ونزلت لك من العرش. I revered you. I came down from my throne for you. This is what you're talking to me about, like your camels. I'm here to destroy your house of worship. فيقول أنا رب الإبل وللبيت رب يحميه. I am the Lord of the camels. Those are I'm responsible for them. The house has a Lord that's responsible for that. Just give me my camels. I don't want them to die with you. If you hold on to them, once you're destroyed, then my camels go too. So give me my camels back. It was an act of absolute mockery. And this solidified Abdul Muttalib as one of the most famous people that ever lived in Arabia, probably ever. Because not only did he stand up to Abraha, he didn't beg, he didn't grovel, he didn't ask for anything. He showed a certain degree of integrity and of sharaf that he showed no fear, and he asked him for his haqq. So Abraha actually gave him back the camels. And Abdul Muttalib would take his camels and he would command the people of Mecca to all go to the mountains. Now, how he knew this, I don't know, but he commanded people to go to the mountains. So all the people of Mecca left their homes and they sat in the mountains. Remember, these stories that I'm sharing with you over the last 2 sessions are the stories he grows up with, alayhi salatu wasalam. He grows up listening to these stories. This is what, if you grew up with an elderly uncle or a grandmother, grandfather, then there's at least 5 to 6, maybe to 10 stories that you've heard a million times. That every time you sit with them, they're going to repeat the same story to the point where you're like, how about you take a sip of tea? I'll continue. I'll finish it the way you like it. I'll tell you exactly. I'll make the pauses that you make. Like you memorize the story. They say it so many times. So this is a story that the Prophet ﷺ was not going to hear only from his grandfather, but he was going to hear it from all of the people who went and sat in the mountains to watch what's going to happen, because we can't fight off a 60,000 populated army with elephants, for God's sake. Maybe this is not something we have the ability to do. Abdul Muttalib took he knew that this was not, if this is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's will, then it will be, if not, then it's not. Then he took his camels and he left, and they sat on in the mountains, and the Mahmud would not move, wouldn't budge. Like he's trying to get this. It's looking bad. He's starting to look bad because the elephant won't listen, and the trainers can't get it to move. And as they're doing this, a flock of birds, طير أبابيل, would swarm with little pebbles, and they would fall onto the people. And if you actually read the stories that talk about this, they would get skin diseases and they would die. It wasn't the way maybe you're imagining that these pebbles would hit the person and they would die immediately. No. These people ended up with skin diseases, like and they died from some degree of some infection. Ibn Abbas says, I remember سائس الفيل وأحد جنود أبرهة عمياوين في مكة. Ibn Abbas says he remembers that there was 2 guys who would sit with their hands out asking for food and for sadaqah. One of them was the trainer of the elephant, and the other one was one of the junud in Abraha's army, and they were both blind. And they were both like ill, and people would stay away from them out of fear that they had some contagious disease. So when you actually read the records of what happened to the people there, they didn't all die immediately. Many of them, it took a while, but when this happened to them, when these birds swarm and all these pebbles started hitting them, and Allahu Alam what disease it caused them, a lot of them ran away, like went back to Yemen, and then got on their ships and went back to Habasha. Abraha himself was amongst those who died, and a lot of the people say also died, and the people of Mecca, the Mekkis or the Quraysh, people of Quraysh buried them, and the people who didn't die stayed in Mecca, extremely ill and uncared for, like just as ibrah, as an example of what would happen. Of course, this would turn into one of the most important stories, and this became Am al-Fil, the year of the elephant, and it became the year that people would use as a hallmark for history. Like, when did that happen? 3 years before the year of the elephant, or 5 years after the year of the elephant. It became the hallmark year. Everyone knew. And the Prophet ﷺ was born that year. That was the year he was born, alayhi salatu wasalam. His birth was Am al-Fil, alayhi salatu wasalam. He grew up, obviously, listening to these stories being told and listening to the bravery and the courage of his grandfather, Abdul Muttalib, as he spoke to Abraha al-Ashraf. A third thing that Abdul Muttalib did is he revived the law of Ibrahim, alayhi salam. The law of Ibrahim, not the Tawheed, because that stayed, like the paganism stayed there, but the law. What do you mean by law? Meaning zina being haram, and khamr being haram, and the laws of Ibrahim in terms of what type of food you eat and what type of meat you can't eat. They still knew what the law of Ibrahim alayhi salam was, and Abdul Muttalib, what he did is he brought that back again. He started bringing that back, which is why when the Prophet alayhi salam grew up, the word zina was being used. It was brought back, and it was something that, and there was a certain degree of social punishment in terms of people, your reputation being ruined if you fell into this. When it came to khamr was looked down on, even though it was something that was not necessarily forbidden. So he brought back these laws, and it was almost like a tamheed. It was just setting the scene for the Prophet ﷺ. So when he brought the law of Ibrahim ﷺ in full, people weren't. It wasn't too weird for people because Abdul Muttalib had already brought a lot of that law back. And that's very important because you're going to see the effect of that later on. And the fourth thing that he did is that he brought Khuza'a back into the alliance with Quraysh. This is going to affect the Prophet ﷺ a lot. Khuza'a being brought back in by Abdul Muttalib was a big deal. Khuza'a was the arch enemy of Quraysh. They ruled the Mecca for a long time. Many sources say that they're the ones who buried Zamzam to make sure no one could benefit from it when they were kicked out of Mecca. So these are people, and they always wanted to come back and fight to get to Mecca. So they are part of these ongoing wars in Harb al-Fijar, for example. They were always a part of it, trying to get back into Mecca. But they had been kicked out for so long, and they found no success in doing it. Abdul Muttalib ibn Hashim was able to bring that back because his grandmother was from Khuza'a. Abdul Muttalib's grandmother, did I put this here? I think I put this here somewhere. I didn't. Oh, that's all right. So Abdul Muttalib's grandmother, meaning the wife of Abd Manaf, was from Khuza'a. So he used that connection that he had with Khuza'a to bring back this tribe into Mecca. And he brought them back not to rule, not to run things, but to exist in Mecca, again, to be respected there. So he built this strong alliance with Mecca. A lot of the people from Quraysh didn't like that. They didn't want that. They wanted Khuza'a out because you don't trust them, because they're always going to want to take the city over again. So there's always that fear. Al-Muttalib erased all of that and made sure. So when the Prophet ﷺ needed an ally, who do you think he's going to find? Right? So when you go study, for example, Fatih Mecca, you'll see what I mean. Like the Prophet ﷺ, at a time when he needed a strong tribe to be his ally within Arabia, it's going to be them. Why? Because of the loyalty they had to his grandfather. They never forgot what his grandfather did for them. That he brought them back willingly and allowed them to exist. So the Prophet ﷺ had this is all Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala set up for him. He's setting things up. So when the Prophet ﷺ is going to come and do stuff, he's going to find there's opportunity here because of this connection. There's opportunity there because of that connection. He's going to use all of these connections that he has in his life, ﷺ, to actually make this happen. They're not a lot of them, but enough of them for this to work. So he bringing Khuza'a back was an important piece because it strengthened Mecca. Now Quraysh and Khuza'a were both there, and they were both defending it. So there was less. Again, he did this after Abraha came because he's like, well, we're too weak. After Abraha came, he's like, well, this time Allah bailed us out with the Tayr Ababil. I don't know what's going to happen next time. I need to be stronger. So he brings in Khuza'ah, so that now there's an alliance. And there's more likely, if Mecca is raided, that there's more people to defend it. And when the Prophet ﷺ claimed to bring not just the law of Ibrahim, but the deen of Ibrahim, Khuza'ah was more likely because they knew how Abdul Muttalib thought. They knew that Abdul Muttalib was thinking down those lines to begin with, but he never figured it out fully. So they sided with him, ﷺ, when it really did matter. So at the end, why did he choose the Arabs, subhanahu wa ta'ala? There's a couple of things here. And I'm not saying that none of these are mutlaq, none of these are, it's all honor. No. It's just certain words had important meanings to them. The word honor or sharaf, the word integrity, these words had a lot of meaning. Why is this important? Because before you can establish a law that will hold everyone accountable, you need an internal law that will hold everyone accountable. Like, there's no way for anything to work if your word is not good. If I can't trust you, if there's no trustworthiness, if you don't have that feeling that my honor would not allow me to betray or to lie or to give you my word and then take it back again, then it's impossible to establish a faith. You can't establish ethics or principles or values, and you can't establish law. So the Prophet ﷺ needed people who valued this, regardless of why. They valued it for a stupid reason, agreed, but they still valued it. It was still important to them. It had to be. And of course, that was one of the reasons why they were chosen for this, because you could hold the Arab to their word. He was willing to, and I gave you an example of a Samawil, for example. If he promised you something, he's going to see it through. If it cost him his life, it cost him his life. It was fine, because he would find that to be less of a shaming thing than for him to promise you something and then not see it through, or chicken out or bail out at some point and not commit to his promise. The concept of honor and integrity was very, very important to a Arabi person. Communication. They were masters of their tongues. They had a high degree of language proficiency. They were master communicators. This is important. In order for Islam to be something that's going to continue for well after they vanish. So the 8 weeks that I've spent with you talking to you about these people, those people are gone. They don't exist anymore. They'll never exist again. They vanished with they vanished with history. They're gone. But they needed to have certain qualities in order for Islam to survive and continue. In order for Islam to reach people from different backgrounds who didn't speak that language, you needed to make sure that these people were very good at communicating and could speak very well and articulate things very precisely, so that the language, when people came to read the language later, they could understand, and the translation would make sense to them. They were able to actually, in this language, is something that has that ability. So that communication piece is very, very important. The generosity. And not, obviously, this is not cookie cutter quality for everyone, and it's not the perfect. But these things were there. You needed a group of people who again valued being generous, being known as generous, over having enough for themselves. Because what was going to be built by the Prophet ﷺ required a lot of wealth to be put. Wealth amongst people who didn't have a lot of it. So if they were a little bit stingy, then this was not going to work at all. Like this whole plan was not going to succeed if the people he was speaking to were even just a little bit stingy. But the concept of karam, which still exists today, like you go to someone's house, they will bring out the best that they have, even if this is all they have. They will absolutely do that. They will make sure that they yukrimuk, and they show their best generosity, regardless of whether they can afford it or they can't afford it. It's something that most people still carry along with them, sometimes a little bit too much, but that concept was there. And that was important because the Prophet ﷺ was going to need this. He was going to need people who are willing to do that, who are willing, once he asked for money, that they wouldn't allow him to ask for it and then not get it. That makes sense. Like it's a big ayib, by the way. Like this is why maybe what I'm trying to think of doing here is actually I thought about this yesterday as I was preparing this. What I'm trying to do here probably is not going to work because it works elsewhere. Like I grew up, and the shuyukh they would get on the minbar and they say, no one leaves today until we have enough money for this, and no one would leave until the money was there. Because it was considered ayib. The sheikh said this, it wasn't the sheikh, anyone, to say something like that and then not get what they wanted. Like they would consider that an act of, it would be shameful upon the people who he spoke to. Which is why maybe I imagine that it should work here, but I don't think it's going to work here. I don't think it's, I'm starting to understand it's probably not going to work in this country at all. I don't think people care. If I stand up, I'm just saying, like I understand that maybe there's a little bit of a cultural difference between what I'm assuming and what actually is. Like I remember things very clearly. Like I remember very clearly someone on the minbar saying, "This is what amount that we need," or someone standing up in the message saying, "I got robbed the other day, and I'm short this amount of money to pay my debt, or I go to jail." And people wouldn't leave the message before the whatever amount of money was gathered amongst those who were there. And I think it's a part of the culture that it still exists in certain parts of it. But that is important. Like this was the Prophet ﷺ later on was you're going to see how this is going to be very important in his story in general. Chastity. Arabs cared for this. They cared for the tahara, for the purity of nasab, meaning the bastardom, which is a concept that was spreading like wildfire in Europe. In Arabia, interestingly enough, was less spread. It was less known to be the problem. People cared for this more, that your nasab, knowing who your father was and knowing who your mother was and what lineage they had. So marriage was, maybe yes, they had many wives, but at least they were wives, and the lady was it was a marriage. It was not. So anything that was not being practiced that way was pointed out, and it was shamed. So that chastity is important because the law of Ibrahim is definitely going to have that in it as well. A certain degree of selflessness, which we talked about, a certain degree of bravery, perseverance, living in that climate, a certain degree of love, understanding what that word means. I talked about this a little bit last time, and freedom. I think I put that at the end because I think it's more important. Al-Arabi, with all of his flaws, extremely illiterate, very ignorant sometimes, has values that are not the best, doesn't treat people, but he was free. You couldn't come and establish any authority over him. If he didn't like what you said, he got on his horse and he took out his sword, and that's it. He had the desert, and he didn't care. So this aspect of their freedom of refusing to be enslaved, like being enslaved was something that would happen based on war. But outside of that, I mean, it was accepted because they couldn't do anything about it. They couldn't get out of it. But outside of that, the Arabi refused to give up his own will for anything. Like his free will is what he valued the most. And this piece, wallahu alam, was an extremely important factor in why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala chose the Arab. With all of their flaws that still exist today and all of their problems, they were free people. Islam doesn't work with people who aren't free. Islam does not function on a platform, on a baseline that lacks the love of freedom, of you making your own choices, no one coercing you or forcing you to do something. So the Arab, and that's why they weren't governed. They couldn't govern themselves because no Arabi was going to let anyone else govern them. That makes sense. Like they accept maybe the law of the tribe or whatnot, but okay, we're gonna choose a king. That was hard. It was very hard. Like little small groups here and there in tribes and in small kingdoms, but to actually bring everyone together is very difficult. Which is why you have so many Salalik. Like this group existed because it was very hard to govern Arab. They just didn't accept it because they were just too proud for it. And that freedom piece was something that they valued. The desert teaches that. The desert is so harsh that it makes it not worthy to live life any other way than the way you want to live it, because it's not long enough. Like life for them was not long enough for them to care about longevity. They knew they were going to die young anyways, so might as well the years that I live the way I want to live. So that value was important. So when the Prophet ﷺ brought Islam, the people who accepted it had to have that thirst and respect for their own freedom and liberty. And that's why Islam functioned for them well. That's why when Rabi'i would walk into the balat of Kisra, he would poking his extremely expensive Persian rug with his spear, just out of to spite him, would tell him, أجئنا لنخرج العباد من عبادة العباد إلى عبادة رب العباد. We're here to remove people from the slavery of people to the slavery of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We're here to liberate them. I'm here to liberate your people so they don't worship you anymore, because you bleed and you're just a person and you have no real authority over them. And of course, Kisra is sitting there looking to this Bedouin man who looks like he hasn't had a good meal for the last 15 years in his life, speaking to him that way. He knew that this was a force he couldn't. You can't beat that. Like you can maybe kill this guy, but you're not going to get anywhere. This mentality is too powerful. You have to have a stronger mentality. You have to have a stronger perspective, and they didn't. All right, his parents, alayhi salatu wasalam. I'll end with that, inshallah, the last piece of this course. So his father is Abdullah ibn Abd al-Muttalib. Abd al-Muttalib's favorite son. He had many sons, Abd al-Muttalib. He would have 10. And Abdullah was one of the youngest, and he absolutely adored his son Abdullah. And he made an oath that if Allah gave him 10 sons, that he would slaughter one of them. Don't ask me why. I don't know why they say these things. They would say these things. I'm not defending everything that they say or they do. I think I've made that clear. They have a lot of flaws. So this is what he said. If Allah gives me 10 sons, I'm going to slaughter one of them. So he had 10 sons. I didn't think he was going to get 10 sons, and he did. So he's like, okay, now what do I do? So he did qur'ah, and there were ways to get out of this, but he flipped a coin. Every time he'd do qur'ah, and they would leave it for luck, it'd turn out to Abdullah. Turn out to Abdullah. Turn out to Abdullah. So he turned to he went to one of the qudah, one of the hukama, one of the people who can make judgments. He said, I'm not killing my son. I need a way out. So he said, إذن تفديه بمئة من الإبل. The ransom to get out of this oath that you make is 100. Some say 10, but the most sources say 100 camels, which is a lot of money. That's 100 cars. This is a lot of money. In the millions. So he slaughtered 100 ibil so he wouldn't murder some, which is why the Prophet ﷺ in many أنا ابن الذبيحين, right? أنا ابن الذبيحين. So the first dhabih is Ismail alayhi salam, and the second dhabih is his father Abdullah. And then Abdul Muttalib, after that happened, he decided to marry his son off. So he married his son to Amina bint Wahab. Now I think I have it here. Where do I have it? So here's the Prophet ﷺ's parents. So Amina bint Wahab. So people make a mistake all the time. I just want you to see it. Wahab's dad, his name is Abd Manaf. It's not the same Abd Manaf, right? The people make this mistake all the time. They think that the relation between his two fathers is quite far away. So the Abd Manaf, which is Amina's grandfather, is different than the Abd Manaf, which is the Prophet ﷺ's great grandfather. They're two different people. So Amina was the daughter of the chief of Bani Zuhra. So you see up there, Zuhra ibn Kilab. So Zuhra ibn Kilab ibn Murrah ibn Ka'b. So you can see that and I put this in the early diagram. You can go back and look at it. That she was not from the tribe that descended from Qusay ibn Kilab. So the Prophet ﷺ's grandfather, Qusay, who was the one who brought all of Quraysh together in Mecca and kicked out Khuzā and kicked out everyone else, he had a brother by the name of Zuhra. And he didn't have as many sons, and he was not as famous, and they were a small tribe. They were a small tribe. But by the time, obviously, the Prophet ﷺ was around, that tribe was much bigger. And Sayyid Ha'ula, and they were they were people of great ethics. Like they were people who were not in the spotlight. They weren't fighting over status like Hashim and Abdul. They weren't involved in that. They were people of status that came from wealth and just kind of minding their own business. And Sayyid Ha'ula al-Qawm kan Zuhra, kan Wahab ibn Abd Manaf ibn Zuhra. So Abdul Muttalib got his son Abdullah to marry the highest status lady of all of Quraysh at the time, which is the Sayyida Amina bint Wahab ibn Abd Manaf ibn Zuhra ibn Kilab ibn Murrah ibn Ka'b. And the story goes that Abdullah ibn Abdul Muttalib, before he got married, he was a businessman. He'd go back and forth, for tijara. And there was a lady who was the sister of Waraqah bin Nawfal. Some say the daughter, but I think it's a sister. Wallahu a'lam. I put the story for you here if you care. She would see him and she would tell him, "Come and marry me." And he would say, "No, Abdullah would only do it with his father. He's his father's spoiled boy, so he only listens to this." But he said, "No, my father told me to marry someone else, not you." So she would, every time she'd come marry me. And then she told him, come, don't marry me. Just come with me. Bil-haram. Just come. I don't care. It doesn't have to be marriage. Just come. And he would say no. And there's a poetry that I shared. أما الحرام فالممات دونه والحل لا حل فأستبينه فكيف لي بالأمر الذي تبغينه يحمي الكريم عرضه ودينه. So as Arab, he said poetry. I don't fall in haram. So he kept on going back to he wouldn't listen to her. And then his father had him marry Amina bint Wahab, who was the Sayyidat Nisa Quraysh at the time. They would get married, be together maybe for a couple of nights. He would go on his next. On his way to his business a week or two later, and the lady would see him and she wouldn't say anything. So we turn to her and say, "La tabghin, well, you're not going to call me this time? I'll marry you if you want." فقالت لا ذهب النور الذي بين عينيك. There was something between your eyes. There was a light. It's gone now. I don't know where it's gone. And there's a light between your eyes. It's gone. Someone took it. I don't want you anymore. And he would continue on his way, and he would die. Yeah, Abdullah would die on that journey. Like he wouldn't come back. So Amina bint Wahab would lose her husband maybe a couple of weeks after she got married, but she was pregnant. Yeah, with Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. You know, yeah. So that's the story of his of his life. And he was born alayhi salatu wasalam the 12th of Rabi al-Awwal, what we think to be April 24th or April 20th of 571 AD. There is some degree of difference of opinion on this. Interestingly enough, April 24th is my son's birthday. Yeah, I always tell him, you're lucky. And that's the day I graduated from medicine. April 24th. not that it has any importance at all, but just when you look at you go to the studies of the scholars, they give certain dates of when he was born, alayhi salatu wasalam. Rabi al-Awwal is. What I'm going to do is I'm going to end right there. And the beginning of the next, part 2 of this course, inshallah, there's part 2 and part 3 at least for this to finish. We'll start with his blessed birth, alayhi salatu wasalam, and talking about it. I think it's very much worth your time to know the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam's lineage a little bit, just a little bit of kind of where he kind of hailed from, alayhi salatu wasalam. And scholars, at least everyone who taught me, were they took a certain degree of interest in memorizing his name, alayhi salatu wasalam, meaning his nasab. And I have it up there for you, so try and take some time and do it for yourself. Muhammad ibn Abdullah, ibn Abdul Muttalib, ibn Hashim, ibn Abd Manaf, ibn Qusay, ibn Kilab, ibn Murrah, ibn Ka'b, ibn Lu'ay, ibn Ghalib, ibn Fihr, ibn Malik, ibn Nadr, ibn Kinar, ibn Khuzayl, ibn Mudrika, ibn Ilyas, ibn Mudar, ibn Nizar, ibn Ma'ad, ibn Adnan. وهذا المتفق عليه. This is what is agreed upon of his nasab, alayhi salatu wasalam, meaning they know it right back to Adnan. After Adnan to Ismail, alayhi salam, there's difference of opinion. There's a lot of difference of opinion. Too much to make it something that you have to memorize. But they count it back to Ismail, and they count it back from Ismail and Ibrahim to Adam alayhi salam. And this is something that, of course, is very specific to again, another specificity of the Arabian culture. But I think I talked about that enough at the beginning of the course, so I'm not going to spend time doing that right now. So on with that, inshallah ta'ala. So why study his life story? We'll talk about this, inshallah, next. I feel like these we can all just push them to next course. Really is the story of human success. You want to see someone go against a lot of odds in his life, someone who will exhaust all of the resources that he has, someone who's going to run into a lot of challenges and difficulties, alayhi salatu wasalam. So it's a beautiful story that has a lot of ups and downs and challenges and failures and problems and tears and sweat and blood. And at the end, there is success, something that even though the person himself maybe didn't see the full extent of the success that he achieved with what he did, alayhi salatu wasalam, is worth kind of seeing that. And anything outside of I'm telling you everything before he was born, alayhi salatu wasalam, just to draw the background of this story. Really, all we have is from his prophecy to his passing away. Everything else in history is subject to whatever the historians want to tell us. But that piece is documented by that book. And that book keeps it all in line. The Quran keeps it all in line. So, but you can't really appreciate the Quran if you don't understand what the Quran is talking about, like what backgrounds the Quran wants you is expecting that you already know, because it's a part of the culture and the basis of life. Has an everlasting effect amongst people. You can tell this story a million times, and every time you tell the story of the Prophet ﷺ, you'll learn something new that you didn't think about the first time, and you'll walk away with a reflection piece, or a piece that you find very meaningful to you that you did not notice the first or second time you did it. He is our role model, ﷺ, and our example, and the one that we strive to emulate and be similar to within our lives, ﷺ, and to draw the parallels of his life to ours. And there will always be a parallel. Like you'll always find something within his life, ﷺ, that you have some similarity within that's meaningful for you to emulate him. And it helps understand the Quran. And this is probably the most important of all. The Quran, you can't understand the Quran. It's very hard to understand the Quran if you don't know what the origin of his life, ﷺ, the background of what the Arabs were like, and then what happened. Because a lot of the Quran is contextual, if not all of it. If it wasn't contextual, the Quran would be very different. If it was just sent all as one book to him, alayhi salatu wasalam, with just, okay, section 1, A, B, C, D, section 2, A, B, C. That's not how the Quran is. It's very dynamic. the constitutions are written that way. That's how we write stuff. That's why we get used to it sometimes. So you want books that work like that. The Quran has that in it. Like there's an underlying theme for everything in the Quran. And the flow is magnificent. But the Quran doesn't do it that way. Whereas 1, 2, 3 is very boring to no one wants to memorize stuff like that. The Quran tells a story. The Quran tells a very, very well put together story that has a lot of dimensions to it, but you need to understand his life in order to actually be able to benefit from that. So what is the course evaluation? It's going to, if you want to do it, it's going to be a reflective piece. It'll be less than 2,000 words, but nothing more than 1,500. Just write an essay on describing the nature of Arabia and the world prior to the birth of Prophet. What did you understand? How do you draw that picture? I've been trying to draw a picture for you with different elements of what the world looked like. He was coming into a world, alayhi salatu wasalam. There's stories he's going to hear. He's going to hear the stories of the Christians of Najran and Lukhdu. He's going to hear the story of his grandfather reviving Zamzam and the story of Abraha, of Am al-Fil. He's going to hear the stories of Dahis wal-Ghabra and Harb al-Basus, and he's going to hear about these orators, these great orators who move people with their sermons, and about these poets, and about Antar ibn Shaddad. He's going to hear about these stories, and is going to draw for him, is going to get, this is what he's working with. Here's the hand he was dealt, alayhi salatu wasalam, so that you can relate to a little bit more to him as he's growing up, alayhi salatu wasalam. So see what you can do to draw that, and then inshallah, and there's no one will fail doing that, but it'll help me see kind of what you took from this. It'll be more of an evaluation for me and how well I did in explaining all of it. And that'll be the pass for this course. And then inshallah ta'ala, maybe not next semester, but probably the September semester, we'll do part 2 and then kind of move after that until we're done this course. Jazakumullah khair. Thank you for attending it. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala put it in your mizan hasanat, and may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala accept from us the little that we've done here. And hopefully this is something that will allow us to connect more to the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam and benefit more from his story, and find closeness to the Quran right before Ramadan. I think it's a good thing to have as you kind of enter this blessed month of the Quran. Subhanallah bihamdik, la ilaha illa anta astaghfiruka wa atubu ilayk. Wa sallallahu wa sallam wa baraka ala nabiyyina wa habibina wa qurrati a'yunina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. Jazakumullah khair. Barakallahu feekum. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.